Week 15 on its way tonight with the Chargers meeting the Las Vegas Raiders in Vegas. So that's a good game to kick the week off, but here's 5 tight ends you shouldn't play this week in Week 15. The first guy I would bench is Jonnu Smith of the Tennessee Titans. Jonnu Smith, very inconsistent this season. Injuries, too, have caught up to him a little. He's been a touchdown-dependent tight end for most of the fantasy year. And this week in a tough matchup on paper versus Detroit, who gives up the 6th least amount of fantasy points, I just can't trust Jonnu Smith in a big spot this week where your team's a game away from making the championship in most fantasy leagues. So if you have Jonnu Smith, I can't trust him. I can't play him. He's a tight end that didn't even reach my top 15 in tight end rankings this week. So Jonnu Smith, he's the first guy to bench. The second guy to bench at tight end this week is Noah Fant of the Denver Broncos. Fant, every week it seems like something's up with him. Last week it was an illness. A few weeks ago, the knee and the ankle he's had problems with. This week it looks like he's going to play. But Noah Fant, he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues since Week 8. So he's been anywhere from 7 to 9 fantasy points. And this week versus Buffalo, which do give up the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends, I could see the same amount from Noah Fant, anywhere from 7 to 9 points. And that's not really going to make an impact, in my opinion. But unless you have no other options, Noah Fant, I think, is an easy bench this week, just going by his track record and the mediocre games he's had. The third tight end to bench this week is Austin Hooper, the Cleveland Browns. I don't know why Hooper is still owned in many fantasy leagues. This guy should barely be owned. He's still owned in half of fantasy leagues at 50%. Last week, he didn't play much because of the neck injury. And now he's got a tough matchup versus the New York Giants that give up the 24th least fantasy points to tight ends. So Austin Hooper, it's an easy bench. Him and Baker just pretty much haven't gotten on the same page except for a game or two this season. And he's not worth the roster hold or the start this week. So I would bench him. The 4th tight end to bench this week's Hayden Hurst of the Atlanta Falcons. Hurst, he was off to a great start in the beginning of the year, but he fizzled out quickly here now in the last 4 weeks is Hurst. Hurst, he's only had a double-digit fantasy game since Week 9. So Hurst in Week 11, no fantasy points. Week 12, 8.8. Week 13, 1.9. And last week versus the Chargers, 1 catch for 7 yards. That's not going to get the job done. That's something I don't want in the starting lineup, because if I got a guy in the starting lineup with 2 fantasy points, that's going to put me behind and be tougher to win. So Hayden Hurst, I can't trust him. His track record's been horrible the last 4 weeks in fantasy football, and I think he's an easy bench here, and also a tight end you should have dropped by now. He's still owned in 65% of fantasy leagues. I don't know why, but this week he's a bench, and the 5th and final tight end to bench this week, Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles. Ertz, he's returned from injury now the last 2 weeks, and his numbers have been nothing pretty much. In Week 13 at Green Bay, 2 catches for 31 yards on 4 targets. And then last week versus New Orleans in Week 14, 3 targets, 2 catches, 8 yards. He's not playing a lot of snaps. Dallas Goedert, he's obviously the number 1 tight end over there in Philly. And Jalen Hurts and Ertz really haven't been on the same page, which Carson Wentz and Ertz have been on the same page for years. So with Hurts in there, I don't think he's going to target Ertz much. He probably did more practice work with Dallas Goedert coming into the season. So Zach Ertz, he's an easy bench. He's a tight end I recommended to drop going into the week as well, because he's just not getting numbers. He's not playing enough snaps either, and he's the number 2 tight end there. So that's 5 tight ends I would bench heading into Week 15.